The automatic food service from Amazon. Now, in order to explain this and also to explain the significance to me, but to not oversell this whole thing, I now want to first describe all the problems. But before I do this, I already show you what is inside the box. This here, whey protein, vegan protein, omega-3 fatty acids, as well as turmeric capsules. Now you might say it is just supplements and 2 packs of protein powder, and you are right. Now there is a slight significance to this, and actually there's a really big significance to this, and I think I am somewhat very close to solving kind of nutrition for me. Not solving nutrition, but at least that's what I think. Now, of course, in reality, this is me mostly being maybe on the 1% of solving an actual problem. If I think I'm on the verge of solving it, maybe on 10% of solving this problem or finding a way better solution than I actually had before. Now, here are all the problems that this seems to solve, or at least try to improve upon. Now, these are not the problems this solves, but these are problems that exist and to which this then might provide a solution to. If I visit a grocery store, I'm incentivized to buy things that are not optimal for me. Think of chocolate, think of pizza, think of, I don't know, carbs, pasta, everything else that is not exactly optimizing my health. If I go to a restaurant, the restaurant's incentive as well as mine differ. So if the restaurant has a vector that basically goes for sustaining the business as well as maximizing profit, therefore maybe, and mine goes towards optimizing my health, then these are usually not aligned. Therefore, there is basically not really a match, or the overlap is only a certain overlap, where ideally it would be all of the overlap that is possible. In other words, these 2 vectors point to different goals, at least in 3D space, not goals, but points in 3D space. But this is only if we consider 3 different variables. I do now realize that in terms of having still suspension, I maybe should have not opened already the pack up, but now I did, so I will continue to now describe also the significance of this. Grocery shopping takes time. Now it not only takes time, but also mental effort in order to abstain basically from deviating from the optimal strategy of just buying the things I actually want to buy in the grocery store. It is kind of a joke to say, oh, I'm just getting the things I need at the grocery store, without maybe writing a list, and then you write a list, and then you still get additional things. Now, it seemed very hard, at least a couple of months back. Now, I am somewhat better at this, I have to say, but still, I want a protein bar that is sweet and that looks like chocolate and that tastes like chocolate, but is, in terms of the protein content, actually just the same as whey protein. And then there are these additives from which I get a headache if I eat 10 protein bars instead of just a little bit of protein powder from basically, well, a protein powder bag. Next problem. To the location where I am living, there is no good delivery of anything, which is not exactly what it sounds like. The problem is that my tenant has my name not in the bell system, and this has been going on for 2 years basically, which means people sometimes ring me. Now there also has been a situation where there are multiple doors, and so I tried all these different things out, and then also trying the previous tenant's name, which is still in there, and basically this resulted in me having had to collect packages for now the last 2 years for possibly hundreds of hours over the city. And that's just the last 2 years, and that's maybe 50 packages, maybe it's 25 to 50 packages, I don't exactly know. It was a huge thing, it was a huge sink of my time, I would have to say, and because they are only open in opening hours, these stores, I could only get them in opening hours. Now there are kind of different solutions possibly to this, such as having these stations where you can pick up the things, and they just basically these are package lockers, you could call them, and these are available from different delivery services, but sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes the package ends up 2 or 3 kilometers away, and then it turns out that it's 10 kilograms of protein powder, and maybe you get a treadmill delivered, and then it's not 3 kilometers away, but actually 6 kilometers away, which then you have to figure out how to transport this, ideally. Now, I've also been trying meal prep. There are so many problems with food, because food takes so much time away. So much time I would ideally spend otherwise. Of course, there is also the incentive to eat normally. Then there is also this social construction that is, okay, we eat together, which might have its reasons. Then there is also, well, the problem that if you eat seemingly with other people, then you have, first of all, the kind of calorie control that is provided by other people, but then also you have to deviate from what would be ideal in terms of your nutrition now. So maybe I just did a resistance training and I have an increased need for protein, but it doesn't happen, the meal doesn't happen to have this in it. So and then you try to eat out in a restaurant. This isn't maybe also, again, going into the restaurant thing. If you try to, for example, just not have anything with added sugar in it, because you kind of from all the different things you experienced, kind of know that you should stay away from anything with added sugar, then you eat a salad somewhere, and then there is balsamico in it, which has sugar usually added to it, and then this causes an effect chain which then lingers on around you for maybe days, weeks, or months. And this sounds all so ridiculous, but at the same time, if I observe this behavior in me, and I am unable to change it, then this is quite frustrating. So I have to try to change it, which then results in me having to take action against something like this. Over the last years, for example, I saw my body composition slightly worsen and worsen and worsen, up until the point where I was very high in terms of the body fat, up until the point where it decreased the likelihood of me talking to someone on the streets, of just normally going out, of basically it should not be a factor, ideally. Of course, it is always a factor how you look and how you think you are perceived and so on and so forth, but the less this is a factor. And also one leverage I used here was to kind of try to standardize my look in order to not think about it too much. And so this has also been a potential solution to at least some part of this problem. Now, in order to potentially try to solve the thing that is diet, the thing that is the time cost of diet, the thing that is, okay, if I'm working from home, how do I cook in order to still have basically the ideal nutrients, but ideally it wouldn't waste any time. Of course, sometimes I want to break and sometimes I want to cook, but even then, if I take the harder approach to then maybe try something else, which then still works, maybe, ideally, at least in terms of nutrition, and then work for the remaining 30 minutes I just gained, then there is a compound effect that kicks in and kicks in and kicks in. Maybe it doesn't kick in because you spent the 30 minutes not into something, or you don't invest the 30 minutes you gain from potentially switching to something like a meal shake into something that is not that long-term beneficial for you. But if you just accumulate basically time saving here and there and here and there, then I think just by doing more of the things you already need to be doing, you kind of are at an earlier version of what you could have been at an earlier point in time. Or, of course, these are two variables, and you can only have either the earlier version of you that has kind of a fixed amount of something, tasks done or success, or you have kind of or you have it the other way around. So I tried eating tuna, I tried cooking chicken, I tried cooking chicken ideally just in a pan, in a pot, not in a pan, because in a pan you have, for example, the problem that you need to add oil. If you add oil, this kind of dilutes the macros, again, not dilutes it, but you just have then more energy, then you have more fat. You also then need to account for the fat with maybe increasing your protein because you want to keep the ratio similar. Then you also have to be at the pan all the time. If you fry something, for example, this could be meat. So therefore I came up with the idea of just getting vegetables, and ideally frozen vegetables, because then they are fresher compared to, they are also more convenient because they are already cut, but then they only come in certain packages, and then you need a freezer for this, and then you need to figure out, okay, do I now buy a freezer? How big should the freezer for this be? And then where do I put the freezer in this not a very small and not very big city apartment? And then you also have the freezer space competing for other things, such as, okay, where do I store frozen fish? Where do I store frozen meat? Where do I store maybe other things I want to freeze, and also meal prep? So I tried meal prepping again. I basically got these boxes I already had bought years ago. I tried them, I tried to unfreeze them. I tried also having a microwave, but the problem with a microwave seems to be that it seems to it seems to encourage cooking in me, making cakes, I don't know. And this is not something I want to spend my time on, or it seems to not be very useful to spend my time on this. Then you also have the problem that you now have so many other things that are available that you could do while eating, which then takes away from basically the sensation of satiety, which then seems to also increase the overall calorie amount I seem to consume in a single day, which then sometimes drives me over the edge. It seems to make me kind of sick, or sickish, you could say. So I tried Huel, for example, as a potential solution to this. Huel is a meal replacement powder. I also researched other meal replacement powders. There were two main problems with this. First of all, I think my body has kind of a certain thing that is hunger. This hunger is not always the same. It's not just I am hungry or not hungry, but hunger goes into basically all of these different dimensions if you just think maybe of the three different variables. This could be just the macronutrients. If now my body has kind of a history of all the foods I have eaten, so my body was exposed to, then it can at any given point in time, in order to now give me the ideal optimal nutrition. So ideally every single bite you would intake would contain the ideal nutrients your body needs at this point in time, but that's obviously not the case. So your body maybe tries to approximate this, and so sometimes there might also be kind of this process might not always work the best. And so what I have tried to do is kind of remove all of the distortions out from this process by getting rid of sugar, by getting rid of other things that kind of where the incentive is more on the side of people that want to make me buy stuff instead of hunger getting me basically to the ideal food. Now there are different razors one could use, not necessarily razors but also filters. One of them would be to have foods without added sugar. One of them would be to not use frying oil, because this just increases the oil, and my body seems to not need that much oil and already get enough, not oil, but more specifically fat, or actually more generally, not specifically. So the frying, for example, if I have a pan available, then I seem to try to make pancakes again and again, and also pancakes with flour. This was an experiment that has been now kind of ongoing, and me trying to introduce maybe more variety of food. Then you have the problem, if you constrain your food selection too much, that your body kind of at a given moment maybe basically has too little foods or too little choices, which then results in you eating something but still feeling kind of hungry, or you don't really know what is going on there in between you and your hunger. And so you eat something, and then you know that you have to eat kind of something different, and then it eventually you kind of splash out, or your subconscious overtakes your conscious part, which then makes you maybe, I don't know, every couple of weeks buy lots of different things at the grocery store in order to try to see what your body actually needs. But then you are exposed again to the incentives at the grocery store, which then drive you again into other directions, because you're running through the aisle with the sweets, because everything else was all the other aisles might have been kind of occupied with people, so you had to go there, or you had to wait for a couple of seconds or a minute. And so again, you land in this situation where you then buy something that is not optimal, that costs you money, even though it doesn't provide you with much benefit. And that's obviously a situation that is just irrational, plain to say. Now, I tried Huel, and the main problem seemed to be that it did not fulfill my nutrient needs. So I tried it, I ate it, and every time I ate it, I still have kind of the same response I also have to simpler carbs, but this could also be to oats, for example, that my body temperature seems to increase, then my mental performance seems to drop down within the next couple of hours. I then have to, again, basically to do two things. I can either wait until kind of I think my blood sugar then normalizes again, and my brain also somewhat normalizes, and my body temperature also somewhat normalizes. I can also do something that is cold exposure, so I could take a cold shower, but I don't want to take a cold shower in the middle of the day, and it also seems not that useful, and also seems to have negative impacts on skin health and so on and so forth. Then you could also go outside to cool you down, but it only kind of works in winter. So these are the three levers I have, and so I notice again as I go into summer in the last weeks and months in this case, that I need to decrease the overall caloric intake, and this is only kind of possible if you think about at least the three macronutrients as kind of maybe the main levers of food. Then if I have a certain protein need, because protein is needed in order to build things in my body, then if I now have a certain ratio of nutrients, that is my average nutrient ratio of my diet, And then I go into summer. Then the problem is that I now have less of the cold lever. I still can go into a river, but the river is not that cold, so it doesn't take out excess energy basically out of this system. So I have to reduce somewhere. Do I reduce the protein? Then I basically mean that this would mean that I then have latent regeneration. If I reduce the fats, I don't know what happens, but I kind of assume that I have the essential fats covered. Maybe I don't, but I do take omega-3 fatty acids, and I don't know, maybe I should take more olive oil, but it doesn't taste that well to me. Sometimes it does, and so I think that my body also kind of tells me how much oil I need, which is usually not that much, but what my body seems to want is protein. And so I have been experimenting with in between 250 to 350 grams of protein, whereas a couple of years before I tried to get 90 grams of protein, but this often I didn't even hit. This is during a given day, and I did not very well in terms of physical performance at this time, I have to say. I still try to be vegetarian. I still try to also additionally be vegan, at least for some part of the time, and this just did not work out. I tried to get my protein from basically peanuts and from eggs, and maybe also from broccoli. It just did not work out because the combination of because the macronutrients just didn't work out. I had too much fat I had too much protein per fat. I also had too much carbs per gram of protein. Not too much protein per fat, but too much fat and too much carb per gram of protein, one could say. Now, I then tried Huel, and Huel had the problem that I also wanted to not make kind of a marginal change, which would be a change that is very tiny, but then over time you make the change bigger. So you could maybe think of this as an exponential function. In the beginning, this could be any time interval, but let's say at month 1 you still have all of normal nutrition. Then after maybe a half-life of 1 month, you try to basically bring it down to 50. Then you try to bring it down to 25, and so on and so forth. So you have basically a function that is kind of going down. It's not linearly, so it does basically have a bigger and bigger impact, one could say, or has a very, very steep curve. But it also depends what you're doing in between, obviously, how these dots are connected then. But I try to kind of replace all of my nutrition with Huel, which retrospectively, seemingly obviously, does not work, because my body is kind of a slow adapting system, it seems, which takes time. So if I, for example, have been eating pancakes for the last 6 months, which is kind of the case, at least for some parts of, I don't know, I often made pancakes, which is in my case, of course, it depends on what you put in the pancakes, but it seems to be the case that there are too many carbs and there is too much fat that comes from the eggs. If I just eat eggs in order to basically satiate my hunger, then I have too much fat for the given amount of protein I get from this, and then I also have an increase in body temperature, but this is kind of different from the carb increase in body temperature, but I'm just not satiated, which means I could wake up in the middle of the night and then I'm ridiculously hungry. It could also mean that I'm way overfilled, basically, with my digestive tract being overfilled, my stomach overfilled, but nonetheless I am still hungry. And this is often what happens if I splurge out into buying different foods at the supermarket, that I then end up having eaten lots of food, and I basically am almost kind of not sick, but it almost hurts, my stomach almost hurts because I've eaten so much food, because my body trying to get in all the different nutrients. Mostly I think then there is a lack of protein, which then results in me being hungry but full, which is ridiculous. And then I can't do much. I cannot be very active because regeneration seems to be lacking so much. And so there are so many facets to this, and also I've tried to kind of reduce my biological age, at least with the metrics I can somewhat track. I have access to an app, which is the app from my gym. There are 4 columns to biological age. It's flexibility, not in general, but at this app, the flexibility, the body, not the body composition, it's called metabolic age. There's also the strength age, and then we have cardiovascular age. And so the marker of cardiovascular age, or cardiorespiratory age, not age, but a marker for cardiorespiratory fitness, seems to be VO2 max, and VO2 max is also in there. So I was able within the last about a year to increase my VO2 max from 53 to 57, which I calculated once, and it seems to be around 7% or something like this. And this is kind of a big deal, I think, which now there are different facets to this. I'm basically trying to revert myself back to a body composition that I already had for years. Years ago, I had a body composition that was very constant for years, and I slowly was able to build up muscle ever since beginning to train at age 12. Of course, I also kind of grew in this phase. I also went through puberty, being exposed to androgens through my own androgens, and basically using this phase also for muscle building, but in my case, it actually did not work that well, given that I have now been training almost 16 years, and I still don't look that ridiculous. So I don't know how close I am to my potential natural upper limit, but that's maybe another question entirely. The question is, if there is an optimal nutrition, how can I approximate this optimal nutrition as well as I can, while at the same time getting basically as much of my time out from a given day? If the day has 24 hours, then you basically have a fixed daily costs, time costs, and then you have variable time costs. And not necessarily cost, but the fixed ones are the cost, and the variable time is kind of the time you're getting out of the day. So what is fixed? Sleep is fixed. I need to sleep a certain amount of hours. This might vary a little bit here and there, but if you average it out for a year, then it seems to be somewhat constant that you sleep just this much. Now, you also have so many other things. You need to cut your nails, you need to maybe get groceries, but what if you could reduce your grocery time cost? You need to, of course, also work, but I would say now work, let's say this is 8 hours in a given day for 7 days a week, and there seems also to be the case that there is kind of a long-term cycle of being able to work, in my case, which means that I have to sometimes pause working, which might be very close to the actual cycle of the week. So maybe on Sundays I take a day off, so this seems to be somewhat working. But if I am somewhat reasonable on Sunday, I also try to basically do things on Sunday, somewhat obviously. Now, there might also be the argument that maybe you implement a rule like this, and there are countries and religions which have rules like this, but well, if I have time and I am somewhat there mentally, then I usually try to do things that I have to do in order to not have to do them in the future. Now, food and the making of food and the cooking of food takes just so much time, and took also just so much time out of my life. Of course, when I grew up, I didn't have to really make my own food that much. Of course, I also helped with getting food ready sometimes, but mostly my parents, mostly my mother, took basically the role of the family nutritionist and also cooked for all of us, which was a very nice scenario. But eventually, of course, I did no longer have access to a situation like this. And so as time went on, I had to figure out, and also I then tried to optimize basically what nutrition could provide to me, and also how much time I would take aside for nutrition. And I might have also gone into maybe over-optimization, not necessarily over-optimization, this is the wrong word. I might have found myself down lanes which I would not have to find myself down at. So there would have been better solutions, which I retrospectively propose would have been maybe switching to meal shakes earlier. But at this time in place, I still had the belief, or I still try to adhere to the constraint that I would eat mostly natural, not natural, but natural as kind of maybe an ideal. Of course, you can pick holes into this ideal, or punch holes into this ideal, and of course you could also use something like what is high processed food, what is hyper palatable food. You need some concept in order to provide people kind of, or also yourself, with a filter in order to sort different things through this filter. In my case, what is a filter I use, or what are filters I use? I use the filter of, is there added sugar in this? If there is added sugar in it, I try to avoid it at all costs, basically, because I know that it will take hours and hours away from me in the future. Not only in the long-term future, not only in 75-year-old me, that then instead of having I don't know, of course, not only in 75-year-old me that instead of maybe going on a hike, now has to sit basically in a wheelchair because the metabolic system has collapsed 10 years earlier, and I have had pre-diabetes at age 45, I don't know, and my body heat seemed to increase every time I ate food at age 35 already, and actually kind of also now already. Now, Huel was I tried to basically switch from eating normal food to eating food powder, and this didn't really work. So I then switched it up. I tried to meal prep more. I tried to basically make something out of normal food that would be similar in terms of the practicality to a food powder. But then basically over the last 2 years, I went into multiple side things that almost seemed like an optimization, and retrospectively it also seems that this this led me there, and this led me there, and this led me there. So what are these different steps? First of all, I tried food powder. Then I tried to basically take food powder and add a few things, but this takes away from the ideal and the simplicity of food powder. I just, whenever I'm hungry, basically I take scoops and then I throw them into a shaker, and then I shake it, and then I drink it, and then it's done. That's the ideal. And ideally, this also now would be individualized. So maybe there would be a a feedback loop process that would take basically my body's needs, or approximate my body's needs better, and therefore optimize my nutrition more towards the needs of my body, instead of being a cookie cutter solution for everybody, which could be the 75-year-old, which is barely doing any activity because he sits in a wheelchair, or me, who is doing resistance training still in order to maybe not sit in a wheelchair at 75, or different. There might also be a wide range of people in this, with different varying levels of body composition, of activity, of jobs they have to do, of nutrient needs, because they have a genetic predisposition to this, and because they have lactose intolerance, and so on and so forth. You get the idea. There are lots of variables one ideally would optimize for. Not that this does not mean that the more variables you optimize for, that the better the solution gets, but of course if you exclude a variable that then turns out to be important, then you miss the mark. Now, one could first of all say that one wants to focus therefore on the variables with the highest weight, but then also to have the variables with the highest weight, you maybe first need to try which variables actually have the highest weight. So a big problem, or a big potential big optimization problem then. So I try to basically take vegetables. This is now one step further from food powder. And in this case I only tried Huel. Why? Because everything else had a sweetener in it, and Huel was the only company that offered food powder without an additional sweetener. And if I expose myself to foods with sweetener, and also if I have sweeteners at home, and this could be sugar in the worst case, but this also could be alternative sweeteners, then it allows me, in my view now, let's say at a certain given satiety level, that would be maybe, let's just say it's 2,500 calories in a given day. Now the calories, again, of course it's important what they are made out of. Let's just say it's the optimal macronutrient ratio of calories. Of course there could also be all these different side things like minerals and vitamins and so on and so forth, and fiber. Let's just say all of this is given. If I now introduce something that artificially makes my body think that this is actually something else, which is it seems to me, what adding at least a sweetener is. It makes you think it's more similar to something like fruit. And because fruit seems to have a higher caloric content, or seems to be somewhat beneficial, and there has been an optimization towards eating fruit, and maybe also eating much fruit, and there also seems to be this feedback loop where fructose decreases the ghrelin, not necessarily the ghrelin response, but there seems to be a feedback loop that actually turns down the hunger hormone, or the hunger feedback loop, which then makes you less hungry, which I also experienced again and again and again. So I try to cut fruit also out of my diet basically dozens of times, and now I'm stable at having zero fruit in my diet and zero fructose in my diet, which is also maybe the problem with fructose syrup, that it also decreases basically your hunger, and therefore at a given level of calories, which in this assumed scenario would now be 2,500 calories, 2.5k, then if you add anything to this, basically if you with any method want now to make this food more appealing to a human, which would be what a restaurant tries to do, even if it does not want to do this initially, because then another restaurant pops up which does add a little bit of sugar, and add a little bit of sugar to the bread, to the cereal, and maybe also a little bit of fat, and then you end up maybe with something like a cookie, which then is not exactly the ideal bite of nutrition, which per unit of nutrition does not provide the optimal thing. Not even trying to approximate it, but just going basically onto a total side tangent just of this optimization process that evolution somewhat accounted for, but hadn't also really accounted for, because it did not have yet hundreds of years of people or of individuals being sorted out kind of by their genes and how well they played with this kind of new diet we developed as humans, or tinkered with, one could also say. So I took vegetables, I took in the beginning not eggs but just protein powder, and basically I tried, okay, I said I already have now bought something that is food powder, I already kind of have a food supplement that I would consider nutrition. Let's just replace this with the next version of this, which would be this. This is also vegan protein powder. This is protein powder. So I'm getting kind of rid of the carbs, but what do I replace the carbs with from Huel? I bought Huel Black, and Huel Black already has higher protein count per 100 grams, but still has quite a little bit of carbs in them. I think it's 15 grams of carbs, which still seem to be too much. Now, if you just take 2,000 calories or 2.5k calories, then it only is, I think, in between 150 and 250 grams of carbs per day. But I usually found myself eating way more, or consuming way more energy than this also from Huel. Maybe 3,000 calories, maybe 4,000 calories. There might be different aspects to why this is the case, I don't exactly know. In the beginning, I also had a sweetened version of Huel. I then switched to the version of Huel that is not sweetened. So then I switched basically to this protein powder, and the idea was, what if I just replace now Huel with protein powder? Now Huel, the promise is that it basically is all nutrition. It provides all your nutritional needs. But if you then split it further down, so basically you have the food powder itself, then they add also minerals and vitamins. So basically you have a vitamin complex in there. Now, if you kind of extract the vitamin complex out of Huel, then it also allows you to just take a fixed amount of vitamins without the vitamins being kind of scaled up and down by how much you eat, which kind of would make sense. Let's say, okay, you eat more. That's probably because you burn more energy in this day. And during this day, this would also maybe mean that some of these different variables might also have a higher demand for, but maybe also not. So I took kind of this out. I switched back to basically having a multivitamin, which then allowed me kind of to just have protein powder. Now, if you only have one source of protein, then this would maybe over time be a little bit too selective. So I already got this, which is a blend of multiple protein sources. So what this has is it's called vegan protein blend, pea protein, which is also in Huel. Then we have soya protein isolate, which there seem to be some potential negative effects on hormones. I don't exactly know. It also has pumpkin seed powder. It also has quinoa flour, flaxseed powder. Flaxseed is also in Huel. Then we have emulsifier sunflower lecithin, which also you find again or often in products like these. For example, Brian Johnson also has sunflower lecithin, I think, in his morning thing, nutty pudding, I think it is called. Digest enzyme. So there is also a digest enzyme in there. So somebody has thought about this. Somebody has thought, okay, maybe if you eat lots of plant protein, then the digestion is not sufficient, and you basically are gassing all the time. And for this reason, we then put as much of digesting enzyme in there, as much as is needed, and therefore you basically have less of the potential cost of eating that much plant protein. Then we have, and this enzyme complex contains amylase, protease, cellulase, lactase, lipase, I don't know how you pronounce them in English, and thickener, which is xanthan gum, which I think you also find in Huel. So I basically had now this here. Simultaneously, Huel was also just too expensive. If I would have gotten all my calories just from Huel, it would have cost me way more than my normal food cost, by factor 1.5 or by factor even 2. So in between factor 1 and 2, so this would be an increase of 50 to 100% of food cost, which I frankly was not able to carry. So Huel was not a solution, and even if I have a little bit of Huel here and there, it just was not a solution that actually I could sustain in the long term, because it was not in my hands to just increase my food cost by factor 1.5 or 2.0. So for comparison. Now, of course, this is also something you might want to consider. Huel also says they have sufficiently enough omega-3 fatty acids in there. This is mostly, I think, through the flaxseed, but also maybe something different. I'm not entirely sure now about this, but I read this article from Huel. Huel also is kind of the only company, I think, or maybe there are also other companies, but they actually did a study which for 1 or 3 months they took a look at a couple of individuals who ate only Huel, drank only Huel, and then had their biomarkers basically also tracked in the beginning and after. So this was not exactly ideal, and maybe there is of course the kind of incentive to present this as a positive outcome. So I don't really know whether to trust this, but I think they also published this in some journal, so I don't exactly, well, I cannot exactly judge. I often feel so ridiculous making these videos so long, but if I just want to make the point, then I have to include all of these different things. And if of course I could make a video where I simplify these things down to, I don't know, I know eat this protein powder, and either I make the point I'm trying to make, or basically I don't make the point at all, because if I simplify these things down to, okay, this is, of course now I also, there are just so many things that I could say. For example, of course I'm not a nutritional scientist, and of course I'm not this. The attempt of this is to try to share the things I am doing, mostly, and I see mostly future self as a proxy, because if I then in the future kind of can look back, then I can see, okay, then I can basically bring myself up to speed on a certain issue in way fewer time than having to make the same mistakes again and again, and go basically through a process of, okay, maybe it's meal prepping, maybe it's this, maybe it's this, maybe it's this, maybe it's this, and then what seems to be the case, and this is also now what I have landed on. So 2 years ago, now almost 2 years ago, I began basically ordering Huel, and then I switched to this here. The next step then, and then I basically switched to trying to approximate something that is Huel, but making it with my own ingredients that also would be a little bit cheaper. Then I switched to eventually just making normal meals again. Then I switched to, okay, how can I optimize this for time? And then I switched to having things like tuna and cottage cheese and other things that are kind of already ready to eat when you buy them in the grocery store. But then I had this problem that arose kind of a year later, and I still had the body composition problem that I could not really solve. And so back kind of to the current situation with this here now. I try to eat protein powder plus vegetables plus tomato sauce plus spices, and plus supplements, basically supplements being omega-3 fatty acids as well as vitamins, a multivitamin, and also mineral. I still had lots of issues that would need to be resolved. For example, I often had, you could call it, brain fog after eating food. Now, why would this be the case? Some part of it seems to be an electrolyte imbalance. So after eating certain kinds of foods, sometimes it's carbohydrates, but it also might just be basically too little salt, but it then also might be too little potassium, not necessarily potassium chloride, but maybe something else. Maybe it's magnesium, I don't know. So I also then got electrolytes as a supplement, and I also began basically pouring salt into what I drink. So it could be a couple of, I don't know, I have this salt shaker, and I just put a little bit of salt into most of what I drink during a given day. And if I'm kind of on the road, then I take half an electrolyte capsule and just put it in my shaker, from which I drink the water out of. I then tried consuming protein powder plus tomato sauce plus spices plus plus nothing basically, and this didn't work that well. The problem was, I think, that I was too much driving into, so the average time spent in something that is close to something that is called keto, or fat burning mode. Now keto is more the name for the diet compared to ketosis, but ketosis or ketosis would be kind of you being in fat burning mode. And if I am too much in fat burning mode, then it seems to be the case that I'm somewhat able, also because I have more mental power, it seems, on average, that I'm driving my body on the higher edge of my regenerational capacity, which then in return gives me basically a higher frequency of incidents where I'm basically going over the edge, which then results in me having incredible headaches or normal headaches, or I don't know, anywhere in between, of having digestive issues, of basically having multiple problems arising. So basically I'm driving myself over the edge, and then I get infected with a cold or a flu or something like this. Now, I then try to introduce eggs, mostly also to diversify again what I would consume on average. Basically the selection of foods. There seems also to be an argument that the more kind of different foods you have in your diet on average, so many vegetables in a given week, like 150 vegetables in a week often is said, or something like this. And so maybe the selection of just so few foods, even if there are kind of different sources of protein in this protein powder I had, was maybe not enough. So I introduced the eggs again, but then the eggs had a problem that you need to cook them in order to basically avoid the negative effect. So there seems to be a component in the eggs that prevents your body from using, I think, vitamin B2 or something like this, and breaking it down properly. Then also if you consume eggs raw, I think it's about 50% of the protein bioavailability you have in the eggs. Then if you have the eggs raw and you want now to pre-prepare this, and how do you put the eggs in there? Also, does a raw egg taste very nice? Of course, you could drink raw egg, and this is actually also something I tried, and well, I eventually would find a solution, but now only as of a couple of weeks ago. So I basically switched back to kind of cooking, because I now had the eggs in there, so I needed to cook all of this. So I added, on a weekly ideal routine, I would have a very big bowl. I would pour in basically a kilogram of protein powder, or 2.5 kilograms of protein powder, then 40 eggs or something like this. Then I would have a spice mix like this here, which contains lots of different spices in the right combinations, and also spices that seem to have somewhat of a benefit, not only in terms of taste, but also in terms of other things they contain and potential effects they have on the body, such as turmeric, for example, contained in curry powder, not necessarily curry powder, but the curry powder that is also kind of a spice mix. And then I added tomato sauce, which is basically mostly carbs, but it seemed to kind of sweeten the whole thing, which again increases carbs, and carbs taste sweet, at least some carbs taste sweet, and so on and so forth. And then I would pour it basically into bowls, and then I would use a microwave I had back then to now make or cook this whole thing. Now this would often basically over bubble, and then I also would have to have this paste, kind of, because the vegetables would be in there, and I would put it in glasses around about the size of this here, and I still kind of have lots of these glasses. This is what one portion then would look like. Now it's kind of frozen because it's, you guessed it, from my freezer. And now I call this protein eggs, because it was protein powder plus eggs plus vegetables plus tomato sauce. And then I also began adding cottage cheese to this in order to have kind of a fat lever. I also began adding olive oil to have basically the benefits of olive oil in there, and also with the olive oil being also kind of a fat lever, even though it probably was a little bit too much retrospectively, but I don't exactly know. It also tasted kind of good. I also had a system where I would have basically just, this was kind of more of the beginning without the eggs, I would have basically all the dry components mixed in one of these glasses, and then I would have a second glass with the sauce. And I also had vinegar in this sauce, and so I had basically these two components, which I then could pour together during a given day. And this turned into actually quite tasty paste, I have to say. At least if I'm very hungry, then everything tastes great, and so it tasted great because I only ate it when I was very hungry. This also, I then added the eggs, which made this kind of impossible, this two-thing system. What this two-thing system also allowed me to do is to have basically double the amount of food prepared, because I could store the dry components out of my freezer and only had to freeze the liquid components in one of these glasses. I would then take the glass out the night before, put it in my fridge, and then it would kind of defreeze. And the night before is not necessarily enough, so it takes around maybe 12 to 16, 18, maybe even 24 hours for this to turn totally liquid, and then I would basically have this like this. And it also tasted somewhat reasonable, I have to say. Also because I think there is a kind of a taste enzyme or something like this in there, even though it is not mentioned, but I think is something in there I think adapts kind of the taste to what, or from what it otherwise would taste like. I then added the eggs, I then added something that would be meat. So this was the point where I realized that this just did not work. And it didn't work because I was not mentally as well equipped, let's just say, or on average my mental power was not as high as it only was a couple of years ago. And there were also lots of other things that were kind of associated to this. I still again and again had cravings for lots of different foods, and so as long as I would have kind of these cravings, of course now there also seems to be a very short, mid and long term duration at which you have kind of different stages of these cravings, and they eventually maybe go away, but only if you have kind of a very good level of nutrition that otherwise basically that kind of removes the necessity for your body to crave kind of novel foods, because you already fulfill your nutrient needs with the foods you eat on a regular basis. So also now, for example, if I fast too long, then my body just throws at me kind of concepts of different foods I have eaten maybe a couple of weeks ago, months ago, years ago even, in order to make me think of food properly and to potentially get some nutrients into me. I then switched to a kind of different situation in which I try to work not from here but from somewhere else. So I also had this problem that I needed to have all of this portable, and so I took these glasses, I put them in my rucksack basically, and I took 2 or 3 of these glasses. And previously I already tried getting my nutrition in shakers, so I tried Huel in here. I also tried then the vegan protein powder in here and just drinking it out, and I would prepare it at home already, which later would turn out to be kind of one of the big downsides of the system, that once I had prepared a shake and I did not drink the shake, because once I arrived home, for example, once I arrived home, the incentive structure is such that I don't want to drink the protein powder, but I just want to eat the food that is at home because it tastes better. So maybe it also fulfills my nutrient needs better, but the problem is then that I have this which already is mixed, and then it only takes a couple of days until it becomes rancid in this protein powder in this bottle, which is already mixed. The same true for Huel, it becomes rancid. And then if I then am exposed again and again to something that is rancid, then I begin to form a negative association with this kind of food. So I begin to avoid protein powder, I begin to avoid Huel. At least retrospectively, this is, I think, what kind of happened. I would eventually find a solution to this, which I then mention later on. So I would then have these glasses with basically protein eggs. It would be kind of the same meal every single day, the same contents. I would mix this still. I would then, once a Sunday usually, then for 2 or 3 hours, often kind of till 10 in the evening, till 11 in the evening, because it all took so long, and then you need to clean up, and then you have all these different ingredients, and it's kind of a very big managing thing, because you're preparing so much food and you need to get all the different proportions right. You need to have the recipe ready for, okay, do I need 2.5 kilograms of protein powder in this very big bowl, or do I need 10 eggs less or more? And then you need to have all of these ingredients shelved, because you have only like this Sunday to now prepare all of the food for the next week, and if you don't, then you have no food prepared, which then could lead possibly towards you then buying lots of other food, which then doesn't fulfill your nutrient needs, and so on and so forth. So I tried these glasses mostly because I also didn't have that many other options, and then I had these glasses in my rucksack, and then these leaked all the time. So I did this a couple of times. I again believed into this idea, maybe it was just the lid. It turns out that if I have somewhat liquid ingredients in there, then eventually it leaks, and then my whole rucksack began kind of to smell like this, and I cleaned my whole rucksack 2, 3, 4 times until, and also my notebook was sometimes in there, or also other technical stuff was also in there, which eventually just wasn't. I couldn't lose my notebook. I couldn't lose the hundreds of euros my notebook costs and just replace it, because I am experimenting with having food in a glass. Also, there's the problem that you then need to have. So in terms of these glasses are actually kind of very somewhat usable in terms of they, compared to other glasses, are quite compact, and they also fit into my freezer, and I cannot no longer hold this glass, because otherwise it constantly has the drops that go onto here. So I needed a solution that was not these glasses. I actually had then one zipper bag, which is a kind of waterproof bag, at least in the beginning it is waterproof, and then I also had 2 zipper bags and an additional bag, but it would always leak and everything would begin to smell. I would have it on my hands, I would have it on my keyboard, which was also kind of in the rucksack, and I then already had begun adding other ingredients. Cottage cheese, I also quit basically trying to be vegetarian. And this was a very big decision for me, because I, for the last 6.5 years at this point in time, tried to be vegetarian. And I didn't, for multiple reasons I will now not go into. I tried to be vegetarian for common reasons why you would be a vegetarian. I needed a food container that contained my food, and I cycled back to the container I already used during my first years of university, these. Now, I already still had these, and these are just very nice food containers, I have to admit. If you open them up, you have the problem that you now have half of it, basically, which is dirty. this lid is often dirty. It also now contains liquid often if the food isn't frozen. So what do you do with this? Do you just leave it here, or where do you put it? Then you also have the problem, if you have something like this, then you need a spoon. Then do you bring a very big spoon? Then you also have the problem that it takes just a lot of time to eat this food. Of course, this is somewhat obvious to most people that usually eat food, but you then have this food, and my food often then was frozen because I just put it in the freezer the night earlier, and then it was not totally unfrozen. By the way, this was also somewhat intended because I would try to fast in the morning in order to keep my mental power kind of on a higher level in the morning, and that's usually kind of, if I fast, then my alertness seems to drive until eventually my hunger takes over too much of basically my otherwise rational or approximating rational agent in me. That is, I associate kind of with this rational agent in me, and then I just get hungry and just want to eat food, and I want to eat food. Everybody kind of, I think, knows this feeling. Now, I then tried this. I tried going for walks, basically working from the library and putting it like this. But then you have kind of this liquid on you, and then you often drop food. And because, well, I usually had just a teaspoon with me in order to eat longer, but you then also need to chew all of this different food, and maybe it doesn't taste good and you expect something different, and then you have this thing that is optimal nutrition, at least according to you, or the best thing you approximate, and then you have this bowl here, and other things, other people just eat a yogurt that is sweet, and you have this thing with you, which is nice sometimes, but sometimes it just is not nice. And then I basically only added 2 options apart from the vegetarian option. So I basically added tuna as well as chicken. The chicken I needed to cook, and the tuna came out of the box. So in the beginning I just ate tuna. Tuna was the meat I just ate. Why? Because tuna has 20 grams of protein per 100 gram and not much of anything else. Now, if you just eat tuna all the time, this might also increase your likelihood of mercury poisoning. I think it is mercury, or it is a different metal that accumulates, I think, then over time maybe. And at this time already, or a year later, I'm not exactly sure about the timeline here, but I think about a year later of trying all of these different things, of trying the glasses and also this step, I would eventually end up having 2 of these boxes with me on a given library day, if I worked in the library, or from the library rather, and then I would have 2 of these boxes, and I would try to make these as nutrient dense as possible, and ideally to then go home and not eat any longer. So I would only have these 2 boxes for food in a given day. Now, there is a kind of a problem with the nutrient density. So if you eat food that is too nutrient dense, then you also are lacking, it seems, at least to me, or in my experience, that I then lack kind of the water part of it. But I still had then these problems of my body heat increasing up to the point where it was just very uncomfortable. My hands often becoming very warm, even in winter. Then working in the library inside did not work that well. And so I then added other options, which then included chicken, which also included turkey, in order to diversify. But then I did not really know how to store these. I did not know how I should make the chicken. In the beginning I basically fried the chicken in the microwave, which again increased, I think, the food density and also got rid of the water content, and again made it also kind of spicier and easier to eat, which then probably also led to kind of overconsumption of food. So I would often find myself eating kind of dried chicken almost, and then still kind of finding myself on the side of having overconsumed this food. Then I had these boxes, and I basically would make every 2 days 2 of these boxes. If I ate 2 of these boxes, and I then usually not did eat 2 of these boxes, I tried basically having 2 of these boxes, but usually I would just go home then for dinner and just eat at home. I also tried different systems of maybe if I just stay in the library till 10 in the evening or till 11 in the evening and then drive home. I also had the system where I would sleep from midnight to 4 in the morning, and then maybe during the day sleep for a couple of naps, and also different experiments, you could say, where it was actually kind of possible, but I was always kind of on the edge of driving myself a little, I don't want to say too hard, but I was on the edge of, I don't want to do this is way too hard. Why would anybody want to do it like this and also have meals like this, and then I kind of go out and I eat my meals I eat my meals in winter with only a shirt on, because I additionally want to do cold exposure, and I additionally want to get steps in, and I want to get sunlight in winter. The sunlight window of a given day is just so short, and then you have to go out at these specific times, but sometimes it doesn't fit into whatever you're working on, and so you end up having no sunlight at all, and well, many different variables. So I then had these boxes. But the problem was, mostly, first of all, I did still have to make the eggs somehow. So the process I eventually landed on is that I would boil 20 eggs in a pot. Then I would store them. I would basically have all of these eggs, and I would also peel them off, and I would put 2 eggs in one of these boxes. I would take 2 spoons of cottage cheese in here. I would take a little bit, maybe 3 or 4 tablespoons of tomato sauce in this, then maybe 200 grams of a given meat. I would then still have also the vegetarian option, but I eventually, if I would be able to choose, and I would not construct my meal selection towards, okay, I still want to try to be vegetarian and eat not that much meat. If I leave this out, exclude this variable, then I usually would choose the option that would be chicken or tuna or turkey, but I would avoid basically the vegetarian food powder in it. So instead of basically the chicken in it, I would have basically vegan or vegetarian food powder in this case, in it. So I would have these different options, which would then allow me to have kind of a bigger selection, but then there is also this expectation reward thing where you just select 2 of these boxes, and then it's kind of a surprise thing, and then it turns out, oh, it's not chicken, it's the vegetarian food powder, because I still want to try to be vegetarian, but I don't want to eat this now, and that's the only thing I have. Okay, I'm hungry, I will eat this now. So, or I wait for another 2 hours, and then I'm hungry enough to eat the food powder, but then it's like, what is this all for? Why do I have to eat something like this just to have a somewhat reasonable body composition and to maintain my level of sport and so on and so forth? If it then still leads to potentially negative side effects of having increased body heat and so on and so forth, I still had these problems also with this kind of food. And this seemed to be somewhat healthy food. Now, I think, now retrospectively, that this food had too much of fat in it. So I would have to eat too much of it in order to have my protein needs met. And I also did not have my proteins need on average met with this food, and also maybe the volume was just too much. So I had then these, but the problem here was that so before I tried once a week, 2 or 3 hours, I listened to podcasts during the making of it, but I also have to be kind of very concentrated, because otherwise it takes like 4 hours to prepare all of the food for a given week, and then you also have to very precisely shop the correct amounts of things, and then you need maybe, I don't know, 5 items of spice, because you need to make the spice mix, and then there are these big intervals of, okay, I need the spice mix, which I need to make every second week, and then I need this and this and this, and then it becomes this very big thing, and it's kind of the opposite of having something you can just throw into a shaker, then shake, and then drink, which would be the other opposite of the ideal. Now, there is also always this ongoing question of how much fun do you allow yourself with food, how much pleasure do you get from food, because in the end it is just nutrition, and if you get the fun out of food, then you could rationalize this whole process and have your body's needs ideally met, ideally optimally met, or whatever you want to have. Ideally, your body's needs met, approximating the optimal intake of food with every marginal unit of food you ingest. Now, I then eventually realized that this just took way too much time. I would arrive often for dinner, basically in the evening. I then would cook for 1 or 2 hours just to get basically a couple of boxes again filled, because I would collect these boxes for a couple of days sometimes, and then if I have a couple of these boxes already empty for a couple of days, and then what if the grocery store doesn't open or does not have open, and I'm missing an ingredient, and maybe it's the holidays, and maybe it's over Christmas or something like this, where I did not have access to food, and then I miscalculate it, and so on and so forth. And I just wanted to get rid of the cooking part, and so and also maybe of the eating part, and also of the part that resulted in not optimal body composition. So eventually, I again and again cycled back to this idea of what if I could just have my food as a food powder? What if this was something that is actually possible? And so I still had these. I then switched over mostly, over weeks and months. I switched back to just making the food whenever I was here, and then I basically tried different things. I bought fuel again because I just wanted to get rid of this ridiculous process that took so much time every single day. It took so much time every single week. This was somewhere, I mean, in the minimum it might have been 2 hours, but probably not. Probably it was 10 to 15 working hours, me writing grocery lists, going to the grocery store. Also the negative effects of all of this, of the negative incentive structures, or the positively, negatively me impacting incentive structures of grocery stores, of restaurants. I also took a look at meal delivery options. I took a look at different meal delivery services. Then you have the problem that the food sometimes is frozen, and then you have the packaging waste, and I did also not want to have that much packaging waste and to not get a box of something like this delivered. Then you also again had meal delivery things that were kind of just selling you glasses with tomato sauce and some other things in it, and they also try to be sometimes vegetarian, but then you still pay the premium of having this in this format. And again, the grocery store seems to make more sense, but of course it then takes time, and the question is, how do you invest time and how do you invest the money you already kind of have? And maybe there are different optimal paths throughout this. So I took a look back at food powder. I ordered Huel again, because I took a look at all the different food powders that were available. I also took a look at a cafeteria that actually was nearby, because there is a kind of a small campus nearby, and whether this was an option. But then you take a look at this and you realize, okay, every third a day they would have pancakes with vanilla ice cream, and this is just not something I want to be exposed to, and I can be exposed to. This is not the standard I want to hold myself up to, and if I go down this route again, then this does not end very well, at least for me, in terms of body composition, in terms of other things. I already was at 84.6 kilograms, with kind of the same amount of muscle maybe, as I also was at 65 kilograms, which is then just mostly fat, I assume. And this was not a very pleasant feeling. In terms of running, for example, I have been running for years, and then if you have just this much fat on you, it just drags you down every single day, basically, because it literally, due to gravity, it just drags you down. It also makes you look ridiculous, and there are just so many other things that I did not actually anticipate that they would be this hard, and it also would be this hard to kind of try to reverse it. Now, I then ordered Huel again. I again took a look at, previously I took a look at different possible food solutions, food powder solutions possible, and I landed on Huel again because they were the only ones that had kind of that they seem to be the most established ones. They seem to be the only ones that provided a food powder that came without artificial sweeteners. Compare this to protein powder, which comes in vanilla, which comes in cookies and cream, and something else, which I already tried. I already also ordered protein powder, initially then the vegan protein powder. I also then ordered whey protein powder, and I basically for years then had one whey protein powder pack, which I only finished a couple of weeks ago actually. I had this with me for 1.5 years because I had the sweetened ones, and the sweetened ones in terms of choice architecture are the ones I always choose, which I then eventually had to get rid of because I would just eat protein powder all the time, which then I had probably too much protein, because I just the protein tasted so nice, and I ate it, and I don't know, well, it's ridiculous. Also, yeah, well, I then ordered Huel again. But I realized again that there was this negative impact of probably the carbs in there that led me with a tingling sensation also under my skin after I ingested it. And for example, there was this one night I came back from somewhere and I was hungry. So as a very basic test, I did a couple 2.5 or 3 scoops of Huel, and I shook them, and after it I was not my hunger was not that better, but my body heat increased. So ideally, if a situation like this arises, now retrospectively I can say something like this: if I eat the ideal food, then my body heat or my body temperature stays down. So I can also now, because I kind of bought a Garmin watch and then I updated the Garmin watch even, which has a temperature sensor in it. I now have kind of data on this. This was this subjective thing that would be, oh, I have this very hot feeling after eating food, and this is so ridiculous. And if fasted before, I would often have basically the sensor would sense a temperature of 29 degrees at kind of room temperature. If I then would eat food, this would increase to sometimes 31, sometimes 32, sometimes even 33 degrees of temperature in here. Now, of course, this is not exactly skin temperature. I think the newer models then have skin temperature. And this would make this data, this allowed me basically to have now an insight into what the effect of this would be. Now, it would also be interesting to have a glucose monitor or something like this, then the response to Huel. Huel also has a glycemic response, I think, published on their website, which again, case made for something like Huel, or for Huel actually, because they have at least written articles on all the different aspects of their food. I also went with this company again. I searched for a keto shake, for example. There were also other keto shakes available, sometimes not in my region, and I figured, what if I just buy them? And then there were these additional shipping costs, which then made the whole project again seem ridiculous compared to just buying food at the grocery store, because it was just so much more affordable compared to these other alternatives. And I did not want to pay a premium, or I could also not afford a premium of 50% or 100% or 150% on my caloric need. So I still have the 2 packs of Huel that I purchased, or 1.5 packs of Huel. I tried it every now and then I came up kind of with a new system. This system was based on so many other iterations of this. It was kind of the culmination, or the combination. I think culmination is also a word, I think. I heard it before, of so many different aspects. And back to this delivery as of today. So Huel has an auto subscription feature, which allows you to put in your, in my case, student discount, and then you also maybe have another discount. You, I think, get 10 or 15% that basically then are continuously applied, and they ship it. But then I had this situation in which, so this would now be the ideal. What if I could just get my food? This is an ideal. Not that any of these different iterations approximated this ideal, maybe a couple of them better, a couple of them worse. What if I got my food delivered? I would take it. Basically, what if somebody just made these for me? Was one idea. And how can I now approximate an ideal like this? What if somebody else would stuff my freezer? I actually looked into maybe hiring a student, but then at the end of the day, I would be the student, because I'm not making that much money, so I would be the student. I also, if I basically listed something on the internet, like, what if I gave somebody basically a certain amount of wage that would shop my groceries, then maybe also cook. Then I would have to provide all of these instructions, and they would basically have access to my apartment and then deliver this to me. I mean, this is what rich people have, which is called people who work for them, I guess. And at the same time, I would be in the situation that I would say, okay, this is a job I would actually take. So then this loop is closed and basically short circuits the whole idea, because I should make this because I don't earn that much otherwise. So then you again look into what if somebody delivers this? What if a grocery store? What if you just go to the grocery store, you just don't buy any food at all, and you just go to a cafeteria, but then the cafeteria does not have open on Sunday, so, and then the cafeteria offers vanilla ice cream with pancakes, which would then something I would take, but then probably end up hungry and not being able to sleep, and with too high body fat in days to weeks to years after. So the idea, I cycled back to another idea, which was, what if I put my food in a powder? What if I try to make now again something like Huel, but with my own ingredients? Because Huel seems to not work, I also don't have any alternatives. I also don't have an alternative that takes into account my blood work. And at this point in time, I was kind of close to trying out Inside Tracker. Inside Tracker is a company that you can upload blood results to, and then provides food recommendations. So here was the now big new idea. It seemed also so ridiculous, but at the same time, people are also drinking protein shakes, at least at the gym. Every other person you tell this would probably say, you're ridiculous. Nonetheless, I decided to try this. What if I could make kind of my own food shake? I would have different levers for different things. So I would try now, and so I had a couple of iterations of this. One of this was, what if I just drink protein powder? So I already had and knew this protein powder, I already now also had Huel, and I already had then whey protein powder. I then, through kind of for this ridiculous idea, what if you could actually get beef in powdered form, or meat in a powdered form? Why the powdered form? I actually got to this again through being exposed to Brian Johnson. Brian Johnson is someone who tries to rejuvenate himself. If you don't know about him already, he tries to rejuvenate the many different parts or metrics you can measure. So this would be different organs and getting them back to an ideal state of functioning, which also, if you compare the function in terms of the age, then it seems to be the case that often 18-year-olds or maybe 21-year-olds have kind of the best function of a given organ or organ system, like maybe the muscles, for example, and have the highest 1 rep max in leg press, for example. So by trying to get or reverse to this ideal, you're basically improving your overall health. That's kind of the idea. And using the age or the chronological or the distinction of chronological and biological age kind of as a distinction from, not as a distinction, kind of as a way to explain basically the potential better function of a body that is closer to an optimum. So if an 80-year-old still runs as fast as an 18-year-old or his version, 18 years, and so many years ago where he was 18, then this is probably better compared to the average 80-year-old. That's kind of the whole idea. So he eats certain foods. He then turned this into products, basically you could buy. And he then turned this into food powder, basically. And I kind of had also hopes on this because it seemed that this was at least a solution, that he had so many different similar thoughts and he put this into a practice, into a protocol. He seemed to have, he already had a VO2 max, for example, of 57 or something like this. Back then I only had like 54, 55, 56. I basically also tried to do something similar. I tried to basically copy the parts of what he did that made sense. For example, trying to increase my VO2 max, which I was fairly successful at, with increasing it by 7% in a given year. Trying to basically do more things that would optimize for basically a healthier body. So I began taking first 1 gram, then 2.5, then 5 grams of creatine. I began also again to take more protein, even though he tries to still be vegan. So I basically tried copying these things, and one of these ideas was that he turned his food into a powder. Why? Mostly because there is the problem, if you have fresh foods and you ship them, then they are not fresh any longer. If you have frozen foods and you ship them frozen, then there is the additional cost of shipping things frozen. Then you also have all the packaging things. So even though, and there's also, there are so many things attached to this. What if you have just a fresh tomato, and now take the tomato, you dry it out, and then you have tomato powder? There probably is an argument to be made that the fresh tomato is probably better because it might contain things that have been dried out in the process. And so I try to adhere to all of these things, all of these different filters I had in my head of eating mostly fresh food, ideally not processed too much, but I eventually gave in into Huel, into protein powder, and so I came up with a system to have my water intake, but also my nutrition available, ideally also while traveling and also while at home, and it also would be minimal cooking cost, it would be minimal supply cost, it would be minimal maintenance cost, in order, similar to how in these books from Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, I think, it is often mentioned that if you set up people with a savings plan and then you increase actually the savings rate over time and also accommodate for the increase in, not the increase, but there is also inflation and over time, so there are different things. If you set them up as default such that the plan then is more optimized in the future compared to people having to make a step in order to, for example, do something for the savings in order to, would you now spend more percentage of your earnings on savings or not? And if you just automate this and say, okay, just sign up once for this, and then it improves automatically, and then it automatically, without any further decision, basically puts you on a better path. At least if you take the current kind of parental approach and you say, okay, there is an entity that knows better than the individual itself, which somewhat, yeah, well, there is of course the question of responsibility. Who is able to take something like this? Who is able to take this responsibility for other people? Is it the state? Is it something else? I don't know. But here is the idea now. I would set something up once. And Brian Johnson, with his blueprint and also with his blueprint products, tried something like this. Is trying something like this, but I, first of all, probably would not be able to afford this because it would be more expensive. Second of all, I think, at least at this point in time, it does not make sense to subscribe to something that is, again, a cookie cutter approach, kind of. Because at this point in time, I already did a blood test with InsideTracker and it had some recommendations and I wanted to try to implement them. If I now instead switch to blueprint products from Brian Johnson, and I also still would have to come up with the rest of the nutrients, because it turns out he did not put, basically, it was not a subscription for all of what you eat, but it is much more things you can add to your nutrition, and then you still have to eat other things. So, as he also seemed to have arrived at the same conclusion with his products, that he would turn them mostly into powder, which you then could add water or milk or something like this to, I then realized maybe I also need to try to implement something like this, but I again take the approach of making or trying to make this on my own. So, of course not making this on my own, but rather assembling kind of this on my own. So I would take InsideTracker's recommendations for food, not so much for supplements. What did InsideTracker recommend to me? Cocoa, also flaxseed, also a couple of other things which I now also have in store. But first of all, I needed kind of the structure, the frame of how would I consume my nutrition, or at least how could I consume my nutrition. Not that I would want to replace all of my nutrition, I would still be able to cook. And this is also maybe something I have learned. I would have to slowly transition, maybe over weeks, over months. It took now years to get myself down to a baseline where I don't crave basically cake every single day, from a point where I would, well, I don't know, would crave it every single day, and it was very hard to abstain from it. And now it is just not a thing I'm thinking that much about, but it took weeks, months, years of kind of establishing healthy habits. The same with the grocery store, of not going into the grocery store and buying something you don't actually want to buy. Now, I came up with a framework, and this framework is that, first of all, I already had tried this shaker. This shaker is now from Company Huel. I already now have talked about them. So I have one shaker which is still kind of the original color. The other ones I spray painted black in order to not have to wear this logo everywhere I go. Now, here's the idea. And I also had multiple iterations of the system of the main problem previously was that once I filled the shaker and also had the liquid in there, and then I shook it, and then I did not want all of it to drink it right now, then it would go stale, usually. Not usually, but sometimes. And then I would have formed this negative association with the food that is in there. Basically, you can only drink something that is food powder if you don't have any other options. It's kind of, one could also bring it down to this thing. But then this also provides kind of this filter of, are you hungry enough to actually eat the right food and not eat half a cake, for example. So here was the idea. And now I present to you already kind of the final solution, because otherwise going through all of the different iterations of this would increase this video to maybe 5 hours. Not 5 hours, but maybe 20 minutes more. So I now have two shakers, and these two shakers are one for food, and this one is blue, because it is for water, and the other one is for food. So now here's the idea. This one never gets dirty with anything else but water. So I have electrolytes in there, or sometimes I also put salt in there, because the electrolyte tablets also cost more than a pack of salt, for example. So I also kind of solve this problem of electrolytes, which I already mentioned. So I throw basically one capsule, which is half of the recommended dose of electrolytes, in here, or sometimes also two, depending on how much I drink out of this. This shaker now is, I don't actually have a shaker, or this one is actually empty. This shaker now has many benefits, I think, and I think they made a very nice product. At least the shaker, at least as long as the upper part of the shaker, and now there was still something in it, and it's built on my keyboard. So these are now the components of the shaker. I also tried a couple of other shakers, but I, for example, also got a shaker from this company, sent for free from bulk, but it had many different issues. This one is kind of the best shaker, I think. First of all, it's made out of plastic, which has downsides to it, but also upsides. One of these upsides is it is lighter compared to something like metal or something else. Now, there are four components to the shaker. First of all, this is the main component. Then you also have this here, which is the grid, which kind of allows you to shake the powder and to get rid of the small clumps in the powder. I think these are called clumps or something like this. Maybe not. the small things that form basically if you put powder in there. Then you have this here, which is the top, and then you have this here. Now, if I compare this to another shaker, I don't, because I don't know where this other shaker is. I only have the other shaker from bulk. Then this is somewhat reasonable. So the first thing, which is somewhat reasonable, is that this here fits in here. The second thing that's somewhat reasonable is that this is at least black. So part of it is at least is already black. Then there's also this nice handle here, which at least holds up for the shakers I already have. Now they also went through different iterations where they had this here slightly to the side in, I think, previous shakers, but now they don't any longer. Now, if you think about the different components of this, then here, for example, you would have something where you could also use this as a cup, for example. So in terms of the ultimate shaker, the one you could do a 5-day hike in the mountains with and just eat powder from your rucksack and fill your water up from a river or something like this. This already now also provides this option. Now, do you want to have hot soup in there? Probably not, because in my experience this then forms itself and then the shakers become not waterproof any longer, and then as you shake them it spills. This happened to now 4 or 5 of my shakers. This is also this top also is basically broken, so as you shake it water comes out of it, which is not very nice, which is kind of one of the big downsides of these shakers. Now, if you want to fill in protein powder in here, then there is a big opening. This is also a big advantage. At the same time, if you now take this and there has previously been protein in it, what usually seems to make sense is to take it out like this, because then the thing in there basically goes down, whereas if you have it like this, then it drops somewhere. Then you have this like this. You could actually put it like this, as I just realized. Maybe also something somebody thought about. If you drink from this, there are 2 options. The first one is like this, but you can also drink like this, and the weight distribution of whatever is in there seems to be somewhat useful. It seems to be nice to hold in the hand in terms of the weight distribution. Also, if you fill it up until here, so you have to fill it up until here with water, and then you add the scoops, which in terms of fuel would be 2 scoops at around 30 or 35 grams. And then if you shake it, it has kind of the ideal consistency. So somebody thought about all of these different components. Okay, how big do we need to make the shaker? Where do we put this line? If it is just normal water, if somebody fills it with milk, if the shake should be drinkable, it should feel like food, maybe not just like water with something added to it. So what is the ideal proportion of protein weight to, not protein weight, but food powder weight to the rest of this, and so on and so forth. And so overall, I think this is just a somewhat reasonably made product. So I bought 4 of these shakers. Now I have 4 of these shakers, and one of these is actually kind of broken, one could say. And I actually do have another shaker. I just don't know. Do I have another shaker? I had 4 of these. I just can't remember where the last one is. I found it in my rucksack. So I got these. Here is now the idea. I have some food powder. I have also to store this food powder somewhere. Now, how do you store food powder in a rucksack? I don't know. So, in theory, it should be totally waterproof, because once water gets into the food powder, it turns into something you need to eat right now, otherwise it gets bad. So do you put it in a box? Do you put it in a zipper bag? Do you put it in a zipper bag and then a zipper bag around it? What happens then if you throw the backpack onto the ground and then this plops, and then you have all of the food powder through your notebook, through your gym clothes, which happen to be wet because you wear in the gym, and so on and so forth. So you could put it in a bottle, but then if you put it in a bottle, how do you get it now into a shaker? So here is the system I came up with. I have a food shaker. Now, because of how this food shaker is formed, what this allows me to do is, without a scoop now, so this is now one that is open, and then we have another one. If I now have this, I can open up this, can take this out, and then have food powder in here. And now I already have water in here. And now I can put this here and then have as much food powder in there as I need. Then I close it, shake it, and then I can drink it. Then I can refill this with 2 options. I first tried with a funnel to fill this up again and again. It didn't really work because it just took too long. So what I now do is I just fill in protein powder up until here. And so I can take the full protein powder scoop and just scoop the protein in Now, the total system consists out of 4 bottles. My water bottle. This is filled up to maybe 750 to 1 liter with water with electrolytes on the bottom of this. If the electrolyte capsule is on the bottom of this, what this means is that there is a grid which protects the electrolyte capsule, which is also meant for the stomach acid to go out here, which means every time I refill this, my water is electrolyted. Now, if I would put food powder in this here, then if I didn't wash this for 2 days, let's say I'm on the road and I'm not able to wash this properly, maybe I could wash it in a hostel and so on and so forth, but maybe I don't. So if I just have water in here and I refill it with tap water, then this does not really get stale. And also what I can do, because it's a shaker, I can just shake it. So if I have drunken all the water out of this bottle and I'm about to refill, then I can just refill a little bit, then shake it and drink it. And then the same I can also do with a shaker in which I have food. So I have the water bottle now, and then I have the food bottle. The food bottle I also fill with water up to approximately this line, or maybe a little bit higher. Then I can basically add protein from one of the protein bottles. Now, not necessarily protein. In the beginning I had one with Huel. I actually had in the beginning 2 with Huel, because I still try to make Huel possible. So I would have 2 bottles with Huel. I actually filled them up to the brink, but then I basically went down to this line because otherwise the refilling process took too long. Now, so in the beginning, 2 bottles of Huel, then I switched to Huel plus 1 vegan protein powder bottle, then I switched to vegan protein powder plus whey protein powder, and that's still the distribution I am running on. Now, I now want to just describe a couple of situations in which I then use the system. So recently I was traveling and I was in the train. So last Christmas, for example, I visited my parents, which very luckily are still alive. So I visited them, and as I drove home, I basically had my 2 boxes with me, and then I ate them in the train. I was able to eat them in the train, but I then still had hands that were kind of smelling off of food, and I still had my spoon, and I still had to put this other thing somewhere, and then I had to... This is a lot, and then it also could drop, and then somebody tells you, oh, maybe you shouldn't eat food in here. And so it is just... And also everybody sees you're eating food. Whereas with this here, it is kind of a futuristic idea. Actually, in a Donald Duck comic, once saw this thing where there was this machine and then there was just food powder, or not food powder, but something similar like food, and it tasted like there was like... Oh, my brain power is already going down, but I want to finish this video here. So let's cut the side tangents. Example 1. Last year, I had these 2 boxes with me. I didn't eat them, and then also somebody else sat in front of me, and he was like, oh, I'm also very hungry, so I offered him one of these boxes. So 2 of these boxes are gone. I then wanted to go back, but I had to refill these boxes, so I had to schedule this, and I had to maybe have the proper ingredients, and because my nutrition is at this point so particular, but it also kind of has been in the last couple of years, but I cannot just eat cake and then expect that something positive will happen in terms of my health. So I then would have to think all of this time, okay, what do I fill in here? And then I need all the ingredients. I need cottage cheese, I need maybe chicken, I need to cook the chicken, I need maybe tuna, but then where do I buy this? Do I tell somebody else to buy this? Do I ask my mom to buy this for me at the grocery store, just for me to refill these 2 things? And then what if these 2 things are not properly frozen? So I also need a freezer, and so on and so forth, and so on and so forth. So now situation 2. I actually also recently visited my parents, and now here is what I did. I was in the train, then I had 2 shakers with me. The one shaker was filled with water, the other one was also filled with water. I then had my 2 options of protein powder. Now I also ran out of water, and I used the water from the train, which was retrospectively not a very good idea because I was sick for 3 days. Now, for this reason, the next time I did this, I actually bought a bottle of water for a ridiculous price at the train station. It was 1.5 liters of water. So then I searched for a bank to sit on, and I then got my 4 shakers out. Still ridiculous, nonetheless. I think a little bit of a better thing. So I was quite hungry at this point already. I had trained in the morning, so it was now maybe 1 a.m. And so I got my 4 bottles out, I placed them next to me, and then I took the food bottle, and then I already had water in there. And I also used them as drinking bottles, at least previously. Now, once I got this additional bottle, I then basically decided whether I wanted to eat vegan protein or the kind of more sweet whey powder. Not whey powder, but whey protein powder. And then I opened this up, and then I poured as much in as I figured, and then I drank, and then I put in more as I figured, and then eventually I switched to the vegan protein powder because it seemed like, actually I began with the vegan protein powder and then the other one. And then I basically was satiated, and I could go into the train and continue to work. This took me maybe 10 minutes. I also had to search for some place to sit down where I could place my 4 bottles and could get out my 4 bottles. I also had kind of other things with me, so it was not that easy. But also in the train already, just sitting somewhere on there, I just took out a bottle, placed it in between my legs, and then poured protein powder in it, shook it, and then I also did this on the toilet in the train a couple of times already, where it's just not that big of a deal. It depends also on how much space you have in the toilet. And well, also you can do this in a public bathroom. I did this a couple of times in the library, and in the bathroom of the library, or in the toilets of the library, you just go in front of the sink, then you open this up, you fill it with water, then, or if you have it already with water filled, and you only need the food shaker kind of. So you then take, ideally, actually you don't only need to take kind of your food shaker and this other thing with you, because your water bottle might already be filled or not filled, I don't know. But you actually kind of only need 2 shakers, the one where you have the protein powder in and the one where you drink out from. So you might also add maybe electrolytes to the bottle where you add then the food powder, and then you just add as much food powder as you need, and this is usually kind of enough for at least 1 or 2 meals. And so then you're satiated because it's protein, and because it's not carbs that make you then for 1 to 2 or 3 hours go into this, I don't know, state. At least in my case, if I eat simple carbs, then it's my mental state goes here and there and here and there, but it's just not very stable. And so that's now kind of the solution I'm running on. Now back to the package. What does the package now? What problem does the package now solve? It offers now. The problem with Bulk, with this company, was that they would have a very confusing pricing scheme. And this confusing pricing scheme is that they 90% of the time are running discounts. This could be 75%, this could be 80% discounts. Sometimes it's 90% discounts. Sometimes it's a 60% discount. I also get maybe an additional discount from being a student still, but because the prices vary and because protein powder, because it is this much, but it's 2.5 kilograms. And I also calculated a couple of times per gram of protein. Protein from curd, for example, which I also for months basically tried this winter actually, to have 1 pack of curd in here plus water and plus ice cubes in order to make it more stable, basically to reduce the temperature in order to make it less stale and to make it such that I could pack my backpack already in the evening of the day before I would leave, and to not forget this in the fridge. And so I added ice cubes in order for then to at the next day drink this as my breakfast basically after resistance training. But I then realized eventually that curd has quite a little bit of milk sugar in it, so it has about 4 grams of sugar, milk sugar, per 100 grams, which at 500 grams means that there is 20 grams of sugar in it, which if I just have 1 pack of curd, it doesn't make that much of a difference. But if I have multiple pack of curds during the day and also have carbs from other sources, then this seems to make a difference in terms of my mental clarity. Let's just call it mental clarity. So switching to whey protein powder seemed to be the somewhat obvious solution, because also this is just, what if you had curd but you did not have to deal with the package, and then you have to get with a knife the thing into the bottle, and because the pack of curd is usually a bigger opening compared to this, so you cannot just straight pour it in. And so there are other solutions maybe to this as well, but I couldn't make it just, it would take a couple of minutes, and then I often would have stains from the curd on my shirt. So the optimization for curd seemed to be to switch to a source of protein, mostly whey protein, that would have 4/5 less of sugar in it, mostly because it just has a higher protein density. Now I also searched for this keto meal shake from company Bulk, but what I eventually realized is what I actually needed was kind of this here. So it is whey protein, but whey protein also contains other things. So there are, per 100 grams, there are 7 grams of fat, there is 0 grams of fiber, so not necessarily a good fiber source, and there are 77 grams of protein in it. So these are the macronutrients of this given thing. So it already is kind of a keto meal shake. I don't need 20 grams of fat per 100 grams of anything I consume, or per food powder I consume. I also don't need that many carbs, so the 4 grams of carbs seem to hit kind of the sweet spot, so I can drink this as my morning shake. And I also now add different things to this, recommended by Inside Tracker, but also a few things I wanted to put in order to approximate the ideal of algorithmic nutrition. So basically, I would have feedback loops that would observe my body. In this case, I currently have planned once a year a blood draw, and I only did a small blood draw because the big one would have cost a lot. And so I uploaded the data to Inside Tracker, and Inside Tracker then recommended things to me. And these things I now have also in powdered form. So I took the idea of what if I could have my food in a powdered form, and I now try it, or am trying still, to get all of the different ingredients I need, also just in powdered form, because then I can make everything into a powdered form. And how easy is it to mix a powder together with another powder, and then you can make something like a mix of this. And I still have, or I already now have, this here. This is my morning add drink. So I add 2.5 scoops of protein powder to a protein shaker. This is what I drink on resistance training days, on cardio days, on whatever days, because it seems to work as my first meal. Now, I have basically 1 scoop of cacao from this, not scoop, but a tablespoon. This is what was recommended by Inside Tracker to improve basically my blood markers. Now, I also have one tablespoon of greens in there, which is the recommended dose of greens from the same company, from Bulk. Now, Huel also sells greens. You might also have heard about Athletic Greens. For me, it was the thing, what if I could get basically my vegetables in a powdered form? What if I could already in the morning have kind of one shake that ideally already solves all of my nutritional problems? Now, of course, this is not really the case, but what if it could? Or what if I try to approximate this ideal, and then for the rest of the day I'm just able to drink protein shakes without additional things in it that account for the different things food actually provides. So what I have in here so if I take 2 tablespoons out of this, then I have 1 tablespoon of green in there, which is 3.5 scoops as recommended by Bulk for a daily dosage. Then I have 1 tablespoon of cocoa powder. Also Brian Johnson takes quite a little bit of cocoa powder, also makes his own cocoa powder in his kitchen at home, I think. Then there is also psyllium powder in there, this is basically also recommended by Inside Tracker, and I see it also as a lever for fiber. So psyllium has quite a little bit of fiber, and it also is a powder. So per 100 grams it has 80 grams of fiber. So if I'm lacking fiber, and I can actually now also track this because I got my MyFitnessPal premium subscription, and I now can kind of see the different components, and this also has been very helpful, I have to say. This was also kind of an investment, but because it also costs, and what if you just use the free version? But I now actually did like to use the thing, and this also led down this path of getting all of these different things and being able to track all of these different things. And the easier, basically, if I have all the different ingredients with also labels on the back, then it makes it also easier to track these. So this is my fiber lever. The protein lever is the protein powders I have. I have the vegan one, I have this one, the whey one, I have beef as a protein powder, because if you have beef, so I also included now actual beef, not just turkey as well as chicken. And so this was another option. I also had minced beef, but this usually had a proportion of fat to protein from 1 to 1, and I did this for months, but I just did not get leaner. And I also had this heat after eating something like this, and the obvious thing was that it had so much fat in it, which in winter with cold exposure seemed to kind of work, and it did not any longer. So I got rid of the minced meat out of my diet, and I reduced my fat intake again. And even if I have leeway, Brian Johnson, for example, and also so Brian Johnson has this olive oil thing. Inside Tracker recommended to me that I would take 2 tablespoons of olive oil in a given day. And so if I have leeway for basically additional fat in my diet, then I would take this olive oil. But I seem to not like this olive oil. So my body seems to kind of not want this additional fat, and I also seem to not need it. So maybe that's kind of the wrong approach, I don't know, but I just have excluded it, apart from me making pancakes where I would just have olive oil, and then I just eat pancakes. It's too little protein, too many carbs, and it didn't work. And actually, I already last summer, in August, before this thing with my liver markers came up, I was at somewhere around, sometimes I had actually morning fasted weight of 76 kilograms and was at maybe 13, 14, 15% body composition, at least to my bioimpedance scale. And then it reverted back to 82 kilograms and probably the same muscle mass, because I'm, I think, not at a stage at which I can add that much more muscle mass, at least if I don't change something ridiculous, which I don't know what would be, because if I would, then I would obviously kind of try to do it. Apart from maybe taking creatine, and I don't know. Creatine has been kind of the biggest impact thing in terms of all of this, in terms of my training intensity and so on, but that's another story. So I only have kind of nutritional things in here. I don't consider them supplements, even though I think that Psyllium was now on the supplements side of the Inside Tracker recommendation, and that's actually in terms of the thinking that I would just take this, the recommendation from Inside Tracker, basically add protein powder, and then basically I have the different nutritional recommendations from Inside Tracker. The green is a vegetable variety, and I just say, okay, the vegetable variety eats this and eat so many portions of vegetables in a given day, and I just say, okay, I then search for something in a powdered form. This is bulk greens. This is somewhat reasonably priced. It's still ridiculously expensive, especially the greens. It is just greens powder. I don't know why it is so expensive, but I am not the one to judge because I haven't researched this, and I don't know. Maybe they're just selling it at a premium. I have the suspicion that they sell kind of basic products like whey protein at a somewhat reasonable price, but then they sell things like greens powder at a higher premium, because also people accept that greens, also athletic greens, just costs ridiculously much. Now, I have the greens recommendation, not the greens recommendation, but the vegetable variety recommendation, which is basically my equivalent. I just say, okay, the best thing I could do is 3.5 scoops of greens, which is approximately 1 tablespoon. So this is what I have in kind of my morning drink, similar to how Brian Johnson made this Green Giant, which initially I kind of didn't want to do, and he has also 2.5 grams of creatine just, and I'm currently at 25 grams of creatine because it seemed to somewhat work. Maybe I'm going back to 10 grams, but compared to 5 grams, there was still an increase in, I think, my overall intensity. I could push in workouts, and so it seemed reasonable. So the problem with bulk is, apart from the fact that a couple of things are available, like I can get the greens there, I can get the Psyllium husk powder there, I can get the flaxseed powder there, I can get maybe something else there. So this is actually starch, which I use as a kind of carb lever if I ever need, but I haven't used it that much. Then I also still have eggs. Eggs seem to be so healthy and so on and so forth. There might also be the problem with the cholesterol and so on and so forth. So I researched this already, but I figured that this was way too expensive, so I figured that I would pay a premium that is kind of a multiple of the price I would pay at the supermarket. So one pack of eggs, 10 eggs, costs me €2 where I live. Now, this here is 500 grams of egg powder, and 100 grams of egg powder contains, I think, 8 eggs, it was mentioned there. So 40 eggs with €2 per cartridge of, or box of 10 eggs would cost me €8, and 2 packs of this, so 1 pack of this, 500 grams, also cost me €8, which means that it's the same amount of eggs. Now, it turns out, I was not actually sure about this, about the protein bioavailability of the eggs, but it turns out that because of the process, it's called spray painting, I think, the process through which this is made, and by the way, this is what it looks like, and it also smells kind of like waffles, but it doesn't taste like waffles, it just tastes like eggs. And it turns out that this now has a protein bioavailability of 100%, whereas cooked eggs seem to have either also 100% or 90%, but if you have raw eggs, then it's like 50%, and there is also this thing, I think it's called avidine or avidine, where it prevents you from accessing the vitamin B properly. So I also now solved kind of the egg problem. And olive oil, I still have not found a solution for. You cannot get, I think you can get olive oil in some powdered form, but it is also, so it's selling with a premium, I think. So I now have I kind of have now a system where I have an algorithm that in a certain frequency determines what would be ideal to optimize my blood markers, which is Inside Tracker. They actually also recently switched to a subscription, but I already had a subscription because the blood draw with Inside Tracker was not available, so I got my blood draw basically at my doctor's office, and then I just bought the Upload subscription, which currently sells at $149 a year, which is still not ridiculously, but it is expensive, of course. Now, many things cost, and also something like this costs, but if I just think about the time cost of maybe eating or drinking a liter of milk, for example, then I lose probably an hour of good brain power in the day or two. Because of the high sugar content of milk, I seem to not be able to digest the galactose very well. Maybe I'm also slightly lactose intolerant, I don't know. I just can kind of observe the effects and try to improve on them. And so, so now, a big problem with bulk is that they sell at these discounts. If they sell at these discounts, I have to, in order to optimize my finances, then be constantly aware of these, ideally. And if they sell at a 90% discount, then I ideally buy the protein powder for the next 6 months, or maybe for the next 3 or 4. So at some point, actually, I already had kind of 8 packs of protein powder, also mostly sweetened then at this time already, where I tried this out. But now I only have a couple of bags of protein powder, at least currently 6 bags of protein powder. Also because they did not run a discount. And so there is this problem that Huel already solved. Sign up once and then you get delivered this food that is better than normal food, at least if you have this on average, at least according to us, or I don't know. And it seems also in terms of opportunity cost, every time you eat something that somebody prepared for the incentive to make you healthy instead of to optimize for the business sustainability or for the survival of their business. Or think of any big food company that tries, if a food company runs an ad, so this is one lever that recently I heard, I think from a doctor that is called Robert Lustig, who also has a lot of criticism on him for simplifying things and maybe also tweaking studies a little bit to make the narrative simpler. But he mentioned that if there is an ad on a food product, then maybe just don't buy it. So, I now have the system. I can travel with the system. I also have the ability to, if I am hungry, and this is also a rule kind of that I am experimenting on. If I am hungry and I'm eating even normal food, I would now eat normal food, then it takes some of maybe 10 to 20 minutes away from the food I would eat if I just drink a protein shake before. If I drink a protein shake before, then I also have the effect of protein as well as fat, seemingly blunting the blood sugar response if you then eat carbs. That's at least what I heard. And Jessie Inchauspé, a French scientist, if she is a scientist, I don't exactly know, but she at least said this, and she appeared on a couple of podcasts I somewhat frequently listen to. She also mentioned that there is basically this effect of vinegar, of lemon juice, and of also eating something big before, not big before protein. If you eat protein or fat before, then you blunt the blood sugar response. I think that's also what she mentioned. And so I've been trying to incorporate vinegar also within my food shakes, and now I kind of have just this kitchen, which is, okay, here is a food powder, here is, I basically on the left side of my kitchen have the protein powder, which is mostly what my food shake consists of, because it's the thing I need. And there is fat in protein powder anyway, 7 grams of fat per 100 grams, that's not nothing. And the same is true for the vegan protein powder, which has 3.3 grams of fat. If I do need additional fat, and I also already have the additional fat from the 2 grams of EPA, so these are 6 capsules of a size that is kind of, you cannot really see it, but these are just these normal omega-3 fatty capsules. So I already have this kind of also as a fat in my diet on a daily basis, and I could still take the 2 tablespoons of olive oil if I wanted to increase my fat intake. And if I make the shake at home, of course I could add the olive oil. If I am on the road or am out somewhere, then of course this becomes a little bit harder, because the olive oil is again something that is not infinitely shelfable from the moment on from which you connect it basically to the protein powder. And then where do you store the olive oil otherwise? Do you keep a bottle of olive oil in your rucksack, maybe in a plastic bottle? Maybe it's something that works, but then once you are in the train and you just are hungry, and then you need to open up your olive oil bottle and fill this in, then it becomes something you maybe are not very incentivized to do, because you want to avoid the public or the social cost of people looking at you, or you spilling something and then having to clean it up, and so on and so forth. So now I have kind of the system with these 4 bottles. I now usually, So I have these 4 bottles in my fridge. Ideally, I think I would have 5, because then the 4 bottles are in my rucksack. 2 of them are filled with protein powder, 1 with vegan, 1 with whey protein, then 1 is my water bottle with electrolytes, 1 is my food bottle in which I fill food, but it is also a water bottle up until I fill it with food, because I need water in the bottle anyway, so I can already fill the water in there, which now also means, compared to a previous system where I did not have something like this, where this was empty, where I now have about 1.5 liters of water in there, which was a previous lack in this. I have 4 bottles of something in my rucksack, but I don't have like 2 or 3 liters of water. So if I go on a hike or I just travel with the train on a day, then I don't have enough water in order to survive that day. Or not survive, but of course I could survive a single day, maybe with less water, but not for something that would be optimal in terms of then training in the evening still, for example. At home, now I have 1 shaker. This 1 shaker, I don't make anything. I try to only make the things I then eat right after, because otherwise I have protein powder that it then becomes stale even if it's in the fridge. So I have 1 shaker that is in the fridge, and this shaker I also cool again. So once I drank this, and I don't clean the bottle every time, because if I have multiple shakes in a day, I think there is no need to clean the bottle every single time. So this means now that within sometimes 5 minutes of being very hungry, I then fill in 2.5 scoops of protein. In the morning, I take 2 scoops out of this, which is kind of all the different ingredients that I fit in here: flaxseed, psyllium, the greens, and the cocoa. I then add apple cider vinegar to this, and I add also a little bit of salt. But I also experimented already with putting in salt in there. But of course, if you get the density not right, then it might be something you cannot add, because once you have too much salt in something, then you cannot get rid of the salt anymore. And then I have just my first meal like this, then maybe also the second and the third meal, which are then not that big of a meals. Previously I tried eating once a day with omelette and so something like this, but now I can basically spread my meals, and I also train in the morning now, which means my hunger basically shifted forwards. And I think my circadian rhythm, at least ideally, currently it's a little bit off, has shifted forwards, I think, again, which also means I can eat earlier and therefore have to eat not as close to my bedtime, which is somewhat useful. I think there is also this concept, or not concept, but it seems to be evident that if you eat something late at night or in the evening, then you have basically a higher proportion of it which is not used in your body but stored as fat. Compared, of course, this also seems to depend on the macronutrient ratio of the foods, but well, now where again does this package come into play? Bulk does not offer basically a subscription. I already wrote to them if they offer something like this. So they have this very ridiculous pricing scheme that in terms of I need basically to optimize for this, because if I buy 4 packs of protein powder, that's like 115 euros or 150 euros or 160 euros or 170 euros. So it's maybe a 50 euro difference, which maybe accounts to, I don't know, anywhere from 10 to 30% of basically my grocery cost if I happen to buy on this day or on the other day. And then the one powder is already out of stock, and so this is kind of something, kind of a mental roller coaster. And also then need to make time for buying this, and then for optimizing this, and then to have kind of maybe 250 euros ready just for this particular purchase, and then maybe I buy something more or something less. And so a grocery haul, for example, costs about the same thing if you have them on a scheduled frequency, but if you bulk purchase all of this for maybe not even a single month, but for multiple months, then it becomes this big thing. So Amazon now sells at least the protein powders. It does not sell all of the different small things. Now, the small things are basically the additives, and also bulk does not sell eggs. So I got the eggs from Amazon, and they got delivered through something else. Amazon has this thing where you can subscribe to things, and then you save also on them. It's anywhere from 5 to 15%, but it seems to make sense that Amazon then would also obviously make the prices higher, such that they then can tell you that you save 10 to 15% because initially it was higher. So if I buy now this on bulk, this vegan protein powder, then I get it for 38 euros sometimes if it runs on a discount. Sometimes it's 34 euros. Sometimes it's then 45 euros. And so it's kind of ridiculous as the price goes up and down like this. And also the protein powder is so expensive. But per gram of protein, it's kind of the same price as you would pay for curd in the supermarket. But for me, this also comes with the additional cost of having basically 4/5 more sugar per gram of protein which I ingest. So Amazon seems to buy this and then offer to their subscribers or to people who buy on Amazon now, basically to order this. So this cost me, I think, 45 euros, and this vegan protein powder also costs 43 euros. So it's on a higher range of what I would pay for it on bulk. But then I have these savings, which I don't know exactly how much they would account for, and there would also be an egg option that would be available. So here's the idea. I take Amazon, I say, okay, whatever out of all of these ingredients I need for my food shakes, I set up a subscription for. And then Amazon delivers these kind of automatically. I can also pre-schedule things. So for example, I realized a couple of days ago that the current protein powder I had, the whey protein, which I mostly use for the food shakes, was kind of getting empty. And so I took all of the delivery that was planned for the last day of the month to then kind of arrive or be ready on the first day of the month, and scheduled it basically as early as possible, which was like 2 days ago or 3 days ago. And now today the protein powder arrived, which was this package. So within 2 or 3 days, which is also something in terms of fuel and bulk, both deliver kind of maybe half a week for a week, or it usually takes that long. But since Amazon seems to make kind of a point of, well, getting the deliveries out very fast, they arrive today. And so I'm exactly today during lunchtime, basically my protein powder was empty, and so now in the afternoon this arrived. And also because Amazon delivers through a different service and they kind of try harder to basically get things through the door, and I have this situation with either having to drive through the city for a pickup location, or a pickup location that only is open during opening hours, but during opening hours I obviously somewhat try to work or study, and so I try to not drive through the city during working hours during the week. And so Amazon tries basically 2 times usually to deliver something, and they usually not send something back, whereas other companies like DHL, for example, they just reroute it somewhere, and then I have to get it somewhere else, or they just send it back. And if I have ordered protein for 150 euros and other things that are basically part of my grocery list for the next couple of days and weeks, then this is often kind of unfortunate, as this then means that I also then have the problem that if this goes back, and this actually happened with the last purchase from bulk, this actually went back. So 150 euro purchase on bulk would have then cost me maybe 50 euros more, because the discount was not available any longer. But fortunately, I could write them and they sent the same thing again back. But this is again for the negative side effect of the pricing structure or the pricing scheme to make people buy in bulk, maybe. Also, I don't know exactly what they want. Probably maximize profit. That's what I at least assume. So this has been now kind of a solution for this. The idea is now that once a month I get at least the ingredients in powder form delivered, which I can get from Amazon. I would still have to probably buy in bulk ingredients like the bulk greens, which still seem to be a somewhat useful option. Also the psyllium powder, also the organic flaxseed powder, which I also have kind of as a lever in here. Starch I can get from the grocery store. Spices I also get from the grocery store. The idea is also to get kind of the grocery store delivered down and to replace it more and more with maybe powdered, the powdered form. But I still have kind of currently 50% of my nutrition is maybe normal food. Maybe it's even more, because protein does not have that much. The energy density of protein is not that high. So if I have lots of other food, or if I have protein shakes in the morning, then they are not that much in terms of the calories, even if the whey protein powder contains like 7 grams of fat. And now I try to stop the recording, but my keyboard stopped working.